In this video, we're going to explore how Composite Score works inside of TeamGenius. This is a new feature in our Pro tier and is accessible for anybody with the Pro tier and also those interested in it. Feel free to talk to your CSM about it. But let's talk about what that means. In a nutshell, there's two main scenarios that Composite Score can come in handy for. For example, if you move players between tiers during tryouts and you want to see kind of what an overall rating for that player despite what tier they're in, you are able to enable Composite Score, which will allow you to move them between player pools as the tiers and then see kind of a final score for that player across all the tiers that they have participated in. You could also set different aggregate scores for each tier. So if the B tier player, for example, doesn't need to be able to rate as high as an A tier player throughout the assessment, you can set that accordingly. Another use case would be if you needed to combine your in season and tryout scores into just one overall rating for a player. You could have coaches evaluate players on their teams and then also move those players into their age group player pools and see an overall score across those two various evaluation events. So let's take a peek at what that looks like. I have a couple of test assessments here. First, we will explore the movement of players between different tiers. Specifically, this applies to hockey. Probably other sports might have this use case as well, but I know hockey does specifically. So if we go to our setup and to player pools, you can see here I have an A tier, a B tier, and a C tier, and I've set my max aggregate scores here. So anybody that's evaluated in the A tier is able to score a 100 as the max. Those in B tier can score an 80 as a max, and C tier can score top of 60. Whenever you go to edit, that's where you will be able to adjust the aggregate score. From there, if we go and look at the results, I went ahead and scored some players just across the various pools. So I had everybody starting in A here for my skill session. They all have a score there, and then based off of this score, I broke them out into tiers for game one and game two. So these top three players that we see here stayed in the A tier. So their composite score, which is the column next to the TeamGenius OWL, is going to be consistent with their TeamGenius OWL score because they haven't moved tiers. But Alex, for example, here, who went from tier A and then went into tier B and then back to tier A, we can see this composite score here. If I hover over it, it'll highlight where that person has moved from. So this person has been evaluated in tier A and tier B. If we just specifically type in Alex here, we can filter down and see the movement of this player. So in tier A, scored a 60, dropped down to tier B, scored an 80, did really well there. So they then got promoted back to tier A where they scored an 80. Therefore, for tier A, they scored a 70, and for tier B, they scored an 80. That's why the composite score that we're seeing here is 75. It's taking the average of those two tiers. That is kind of how that works. Obviously there's some pretty complex use cases you can get into, but in a nutshell, that's what that composite score is doing. Is it's showing you an overall score across the tiers that they've moved in tryouts based off of those aggregates that you set up under the player pools. You could also set up additional weights here on the session level. So if the skill session needed to count more than the game sessions or vice versa, you can also adjust the weights here, and then that will affect how those scores aggregate too. So this just gives you an additional layer whenever you're going to look at the results. If there's a situation where somebody was in B tier maybe the entire time, somebody from C got promoted up, and then therefore at the end looked like they performed better than somebody that had been in B tier the entire time. This allows you to kind of set some standards so that that doesn't necessarily happen with that max aggregate score that you set at the player pool level. All right, so jumping over into our other use case, in season and tryout score. In this scenario, likely players were evaluated by the coach on their teams, and then they moved into a player pool based off of their age group. So max aggregate score doesn't really apply in this scenario unless you just decide to set that. Typically, this is just going to be the 100, so they're able to score that max. The evaluation schedule, same thing here. If you want their coach evaluations to not weight as heavily as the tryout, you can adjust that here. Let's just say I wanted that to be 50% of the tryout. So I can set my scores according here. For now, I'm just going to leave them even. But if we go to results, player rankings, You can see here, coach evaluations went ahead and scored some people in that and then moved them all into just one player pool for the U12. So here we can see Stacy, for example. Um, if we type in Stacy specifically here, that way we can see, really drill down. Composite score, we are seeing coach evaluations. This person scored a 72.5. Tryout evaluations not as good as 60, so overall 66.25. So again, that is taking in the consideration of the aggregate score that you have set on the player pool level, and then also the weights that you have set on the evaluation session level. So it just gives you an additional layer here. So if you do decide to combine your coach evaluation scores with the tryout scores, you're now able to see that here in this composite score. So to enable composite score, if we go to advanced settings, if you are on the pro tier, you're going to see it right here, composite score or composite ranking scores. Just enable that and save it, and then you'll see it on the results grid. If you do not have that feature quite yet, just talk to your CSM, something that we can look to add into your account, especially with it being a new feature. We're obviously looking for some feedback and curious about additional use cases that you can think of. So feel free to email us csm@teamgenius.com if you have questions about that. You could also reach out to help@teamgenius.com if you needed to talk to our support team. Thank you. Bye.